Good evening, everybody. My name's Eric Wright. I am the education specialist for the Wisconsin Veterans Museum, and I want to welcome a lot of people back and a lot of first-time viewers as well to our virtual movie night and discussion. Before I get started, I just want to say extra big thanks to the Wisconsin Veterans Museum Foundation. They are the ones who make these free events possible for us. And it is with their support that we are, allowed to do these events, not only movie night, but our trivia nights that we have, our curator conversations that we host every other Monday, and so many other events that we have coming up this fall. So big thank you to the Wisconsin Veterans Museum Foundation. And if you'd like any information on the foundation or how you can join, you can certainly go to our website, and that information is on there. Tonight we are looking at the movie Glory. Fantastic movie, released in 1989. Director Edward Zwick, screenplay by Kevin Yari, of course with Matthew Broderick, Morgan Freeman, Denzel Washington, Carrie Ellis, some lesser known actors who were in this movie but no less favorites of mine, such as Bob Gunton, who plays Colonel Charles Harker. You might remember him from also The Shawshank Redemption. Also, you have Clifton Young, who's been kind of a villain-type character in many other movies, smaller parts that you might have seen. Just a fantastic movie all the way around. Of course, this movie follows Colonel Robert Shaw, who commands the very first company of all-black soldiers, the 54th Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry. And this movie looks at the prejudices that they all have to, are forced to deal with. You read a lot of movie descriptions of this, and you hear a lot of people write about the prejudices that they receive from without the organization, the Union troops, the Southern troops, but also this movie really looks at the prejudices that they face within their own unit as well. And you can see that through some of the character developments that happen throughout the movie, such as with Tripp and with Sharts as well, and then Searles, Jonathan Searles too. But this movie also focuses on the valiant heroism that they demonstrated. This, of course, is based on an actual event, an actual unit, and mostly actual people, particularly Colonel Shaw. And it really demonstrated at the time during the Civil War that black soldiers could act, operate, and function just as well as the white soldiers could, which was not a prevailing sentiment at the time. This movie won multiple Academy Awards. Let me pull them up here real quick. It won Best Actor for a Supporting Role, of course, with Denzel Washington, who plays Tripp. Also Best Cinematography, Best Sound, Best Art Direction, and Best Film Editing. Or, I'm sorry, Best Film Editing was a nominee for the Academy Award. So at any time I see this movie on, whether I'm just flipping channels in the middle of the night or what have you, it's just one of those movies that you come back to. It makes it relevant, it makes it timely, and it really makes it a classic. It is over 30 years old. And even when I was watching it last week and then again this week to brush up, this movie could have been released, 2 weeks ago. So it really just does make it for a classic movie. And those are always the most riveting to watch. And another thing that we've been doing, a few of you who have been following us on our movie discussion nights, the first couple, which the first one was The Longest Day, the second one we featured was Tora, Tora, Tora. And I don't want to say that these were mindless movies, but they were more for their entertainment value. They had that patriotic effect, and they really didn't lead you to think a great deal. They presented a historic timeline, historic events, and that was it. The movies that we're going to start getting into now through the rest of the fall, they really start to make you think about different aspects of our society and our military. And we're starting out with Glory, of course, with everything going on right now. This movie kind of really hits home, and it does make you start to think about certain things. So just watch for the movies that we're going to be coming out with in the fall. The discussion questions are going to get a little more intense, and there's going to be a lot more thought-provoking discussion hopefully generated as we go forward. But before we get started, I'd just like to know, what were your first impressions of this film? What did you think of this film? Maybe not when you saw it this time, but maybe the first time you saw it. Anybody want to talk about that real quick?
And seen it in a long time.
Yeah, I saw it probably the last time I saw it maybe was when it first came out, or maybe another time. I saw it another time since then, but thinking back that far, but just I found the context this time very interesting, as you alluded to. First impression, though.
I had to block Ferris Bueller out of my mind. That was the first hurdle.
Yeah.
Yeah, Matthew Broderick had just come off making Ferris Bueller just before this film. This film was made specifically with him in mind to be cast as Colonel Shaw. And the director, Edward Zwick, he kind of had the same problem. As much as he wanted Matthew Broderick in this movie, he did kind of have the same problem separating his role here from Ferris Bueller and some of the other things that he had done previously. But he really liked Matthew Broderick's stage presence. Matthew Broderick started out as a stage actor in Neil Simon plays mostly. And he just thought this was going to be the perfect fit. Of course, Matthew Broderick accepted the role right away without any hesitation. And I can't remember where I read this or where I saw this, but I want to say that there is, from Matthew Broderick's side of his family, a very distant relation to Colonel Robert Gould Shaw. So he does have that aspect as well when he was preparing for this role, which was, I thought, kind of interesting. Does anybody else want to remark on what they thought of this film initially, or what their first impressions were?
It made a great impression on me. I went and saw it with a bunch of my fellow history students. And it was interesting because at the time, very few people knew of the 54th Massachusetts or the Battle of Fort Wagner or knew the story. And so when Shaw dies, that was a profound impact on a lot of people. They were not expecting that. And my reaction was, oh, that's a pretty good depiction of Shaw's death. And everybody around me was just shocked. Wait, you mean Shaw dies?
Yeah, I mean, you know, you have the protagonist of the movie. They usually make it all the way to the end. Yeah. They usually have a successful ending, and you know, and you kind of take that for granted. Kind of an interesting side note on that. Gould Shaw's family actually went out to the site of Fort Wagner after the battle was over with. And they were asked if they wanted his remains removed from there and brought back up to Boston. And they said no, absolutely not. He died where he was supposed to die. He died with the people that he was supposed to die with. And they chose to leave him there. So I always thought that was kind of interesting as well, just to honor, you know, what he had done and what he, I don't want to say accomplished, but I just thought that was, from a family side, from a family perspective, is very honorable. I would hope that my family would do that. Another thing I want to ask before we really get into this discussion as well is, how difficult do you think it is for filmmakers to portray the past on the big screen, especially when you're looking at movies like this, where you have a large source of information, which in this case is Gould Shaw's letters that he wrote back home to his mother. And I believe, Mike, you had that Harvard link that has all the digitized letters in the Harvard University collection, and you can go and read those letters. But for filmmakers to be able to successfully pull this off, to be historically accurate, but still retain that entertainment value, how difficult do you think that is for them?
I saw a podcast with Zwick, and he talked about the reenactors being part of the cast. And at first, you know, as a filmmaker, you just thought, well, you would get a bunch of extras, or they would CGI people into the scenes, or use models or something like that. And then when he found out that there would be reenactors willing to do this work as extras, he thought that was pretty powerful, that they would really portray the background scenery in a very authentic way. And I thought that helped the movie be very believable. Knowing that going in, I thought that was an added feature.
Right, and just like you said, you know, the reenactors, particularly in the opening scene, that was basically filmed during the 125th anniversary of Gettysburg, and I have my notes right here. There were over 15,000 reenactors who participated in that, and I don't know if all of them had to sign a release form or whatever, but the ones that they used in the movie, which is, you know, quite a bit when you look at the formations that are walking across the field, and they really do a good job of depicting this as Antietam, even though it's, you know, really a Gettysburg reenactment. But they all volunteered their time and themselves for no pay at all. They just really wanted this story told, and they thought the best way that they could participate was through the reenactment process. And so when you see those opening scenes, and you see those large formations, not only do you get a really good sense of, you know, maybe how difficult it is to make a movie, especially like you said, Kathy, this was in 1989, so you don't have any CGI then. You know, so you really have to use extras or a vivid imagination somehow. But it also gives you a sense of what it was like to really go to battle in the Civil War. I've been to war myself, and every time I see something depicted like the Civil War, it frightens me. Oh my goodness, I could not even imagine marching, you know, on file, bullets whizzing all around your head, and the only thing you could keep doing is moving forward. It's a brutal sense of battle, and I just can't imagine it.
So Eric, that was one of the things that really like shocked me, and was the how proper battle was back then. How you had to form a line, shoot, and then fill in the gaps, and they just stood there and just shot at each other from feet away. It was just amazing.
Yeah, and you know, and that really speaks a lot to the discipline, you know, that they had to have, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we get into when the 54th is formed and they go into training. And there's a couple points that I have questions about there, but you're right. You know, to just keep marching, and like you said, man goes down, you fill those gaps. We tell a great story at the Museum of Antietam. We have a great diorama that's set up. And when I was first employed by the museum and I was learning the tour script and I was getting all my facts and back information on the Battle of Antietam, I had been there before, but you really don't get a sense of it until you really have to start studying the topic, and getting all that background knowledge. And, you know, it's not just the Civil War. That kind of warfare goes back to, good grief, the Spartans even. Yep. You know, not that we really conduct warfare in any more of a you know, manner that's more pleasant, but still, I mean, I was on tanks. At least I could hide inside that thing. When you're marching in those formations, you've got nowhere to hide, nowhere at all. So we have the opening scene, the Battle of Antietam, but before that, there's some narration by Matthew Broderick. He's reading some of the letters that were written to his mother. And you kind of get the sense, and as he's reading the letters, you get to see camp life. You know, you see guys sitting around, a couple of them are playing instruments, some are cooking, some are just talking and drinking coffee. You see a couple guys.
Baseball.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say baseball as well. And I was looking that up because I was kind of curious about, you know, when baseball started to become modern and popular. And it was right at this time, so that would have been an accurate depiction. You would have seen guys out there, if they had the time or the space, to play a little baseball, which I thought was really interesting. But then, abruptly, you go straight into the battle sequences. So you go from this pristine, orderly camp life. You have, you know, some martial bugles playing in the background, a nice little chorus going on, and then all of a sudden you're thrown right into battle. And that kind of leads to my first question about Colonel Shaw and his sentiments regarding the war. How was that portrayed by Matthew Broderick in those opening sequences. And then after the battle, how had his sentiments changed?
Well, in those letters, I mean, he was very excited about, we're ready to go in, you know, and after experiencing the actual warfare, you know, at the party, he was very subdued, and I mean, he just almost as if he was a little bit in, you know, PTSD or something. You know, he was just sort of in shock, I think. I mean, he wasn't real, you know, terribly engaged with the party, it didn't seem, and so forth. You know, it had changed him that way, I think.
I think it was a kind of a characterization from the naive innocence of, I've studied war at West Point, and I've learned all of it from a book, so I'm ready. And then the realization of what you actually face. I think it was really convenient that Matthew Broderick was very young at the time, because it gives you a sense of how young Shaw was when he accepted, you know, responsibilities that he knew he was not prepared for. Perhaps others knew he was not prepared for, and maybe no one is ever prepared for in those kind of situations, to take on the lives of other people and, you know, really take the responsibility for what they're going to face when you're asked to do things like stand up straight while someone shoots at you from 10 feet away. The kind of courage that it takes to inspire that, as well as to, you know, understand that that's the likely end, not the unlikely. Kind of amazing for someone of 23 or 24 years old. And
I think the social pressure that he had on him with, you know, the father of a governor, knowing all these people that look to him as being the, you know, the next probably politician, the next society leader, there was a lot of pressure on him, and it was a good contrast, or a good showing of how each character grew throughout the movie. I thought too, is, you know, of Shaw growing, Tripp growing, and becoming, you know, something more than what they were.
Exactly right. Yeah. Anybody else got any thoughts on that before I? Well, I would go back and I would speak, ma'am, to your quote. I'm sorry, what's your name sitting next to Lee?
Jean.
Jean. Hi, Jean. You talked about, you know, you can study all this stuff, and you think you're prepared, but you never really know until you're in that position. Excuse me. And especially with the age, like you said, so young. And I would absolutely agree with that. You know, I was 19 when I went off to do my bit, and, you know, we trained and we, you know, we knew we were ready, we were motivated, and then once we got out there, we were totally scared. You don't know what you're going to face, you don't know what it's like until you really get out there. And then with the age, like you said, I keep thinking back to my son. My son's an officer in the Army right now, and he's right at that age as well. And he does lead small groups, but, you know, to lead something like a large group like this, and these were 1,100 men strong in real life. And also historically, you know, the first all-black regiment, you're right, that is a huge amount of pressure. And you just don't know how you're going to react. And then, like you said, Lee, with the social significance as well, it's got to be overwhelming. And then the character developments that you spoke about, those are part of my favorite aspects of the movie, is you really do see these characters grow, not just Shaw, but like you said, also Tripp, Morgan Freeman's character. You just really see how they all get involved, how they really grow, and it just really lends itself to the climax of the movie. And then, of course, you know, we talked about his attitudes changing right after that battle of Antietam. He's basically left for dead. He is wounded. Morgan Freeman comes along. Morgan Freeman is a gravedigger in that opening sequence, gives him a good kick, says, "You okay, Captain?" You know, and then the next thing you see, he's in the hospital, and he's getting some shrapnel removed from his neck. And I thought the juxtaposition of him getting that shrapnel removed from his neck while he's watching a soldier get his legs, sawed off, and he's screaming at the top of his lungs, "Please don't cut anymore." Just thinking about that, I get goosebumps. That's got to be super, super hard to know that you're in a position of leadership and you're getting maybe treated a little bit easier, a little bit better, simply because you have that rank or that title or that authority, as you're watching, a regular private go through absolute hell. Once again, just another thing that I could not possibly imagine having to deal with. I guess I'll just say it. My military experience was pretty fortunate, I suppose. And then going, kind of back to that amputation scene, and also there was a couple scenes in the Battle of Antietam. The director did put some of the goriest parts in the movie right at the beginning. He wants to prepare you for what you're about to see in the rest of the conflicts that you see throughout the film. A lot of directors do not do that in war films. They will spread it out, and you might even see some of the goriest parts at the very end. They're saving that for the climax. But Edward Zwick, he decided to put that in the very beginning, just to kind of prepare you emotionally and mentally for what it is you're about to see, especially since we are talking about the Civil War. So, like Lee was saying, he is wounded. He goes back to Boston. He's at this social party. He meets Frederick Douglass, and this is when he gets nominated to command the 54th. In reality, he did turn down this command twice, simply because he felt that he was unworthy of the position. But every time I watch this movie, when they announce that they want to give him the command, they turn immediately to Matthew Broderick. And the director uses a lot of close-ups in this movie. And close-ups are used to portray, they're really used to portray a sense of emotion. And they really want to grip you with close-up shots. And this close-up shot of Matthew Broderick's face in the movie when he's offered this command, I'm curious, I never saw it as him thinking that he's unworthy. That expression just didn't come across in his face to me. The expression that came across his face to me when I see it is he's unsure he wants to lead these black troops. Did anybody else get that sense, or am I just seeing something different?
Oh, I picked up on that too. I think it's the same thing that General Pershing did in World War I. Is you almost, they felt that they didn't know if it would hurt their career, in my opinion, by accepting something like this.
Something unpopular.
Something unpopular at the time. And that was one of the things that shocked me, was the inherent internal prejudice that everybody had, especially in that scene where, everybody was saying that, oh, black society and the race should be free and all this other stuff. But you saw internally that they were telling a different story. You could just feel it through the movie that they were saying one thing and internally they were meaning another thing.
No, I would absolutely agree, Lee. And you're right. That sense does come across in quite a few of the characters, particularly in that scene there. Anybody else have any thoughts on that?
Like you said, I think they were being very progressive and very forward thinking at the time. And maybe from their peers that was the case. But, hindsight is always a little bit clearer. So to me, it makes me think, if you think you're not prejudiced now, maybe you're not being totally honest. They certainly weren't being completely honest with their own state of their worldview. They wanted to pat themselves on the back and say what great folks they were doing by doing this wonderful thing, and then not allow that regiment to actually participate in war. I think part of that for Shaw was not necessarily, is it good for my career, but if I wanted to seek glory, if I really wanted to go back and test myself in battle, leading that group is not going to give me that opportunity. I'll always live with that failure, knowing that I cowered kind of in fear as I saw it and didn't really prove myself. And I think he was hoping to gain that opportunity, although maybe not as an immediate leader.
I got
Right.
that, I got that impression as well, that he maybe was given that command. I mean, apparently, you know, the parents were, Gould's parents were largely or very abolitionist minded, but also that, just like she said, that there was, I wonder if he did not think he was going to get to see actual combat again, because they make it very clear that a lot of people assume that this is just going to be kind of a political, you know, this leading this unit's going to be for show. They're not going to actually get to see combat. They are, it's you know, it's going to look good for potentially for his future political prospects, but other than that, it's not going to.
I just thought that was another occasion in which they're taking and using, you know, this group of Black men for their own purposes again, not necessarily as that group wants to live, you know, that they volunteered to fight, they volunteered to be in the Army, but we're going to let you do what we want you to do. Not that you're ever free in the military, right? There is a command structure that you're going to be able to, you're not going to pursue your goal necessarily. We're still going to be telling you what that goal is, and you're going to be valued as long as you do what we tell you to do.
And they were set up for failure without shoes, without uniforms, without guns, you know, training,
Yeah.
pay.
One of the unique things about the United States Colored Troops, and it's a mental thing that a lot of people in that generation had trouble doing, was abolitionists free the slaves, but one of the responsibilities of a citizen and acting as a citizen is to put on the uniform if necessary and defend the country. And so what you see kind of in the background of some of what you're describing is, you know, that society is looking at, okay, we can free the slaves, but the next step of thinking them as now as full-fledged citizens is still requiring, they're having trouble making that step.
Yeah. Well, that sort of comes across in that whole conversation with Shaw and Tripp at the pond or whatever, where he wants him to carry the flag, and Tripp's basically saying he's in like a no-win. The blacks basically are in a no-win situation. You know, that he kind of predicts that, okay, everything isn't going to be hunky-dory no matter who wins. Even if our side wins, it's not going to be hunky-dory, you know, always. And you know, I kind of saw that as that's been, you know, years coming true still.
That was.
I agree. Oh, sorry. I was just going to say that I agree. And I thought it was interesting that Shaw didn't seem to really have a good response to him when he brought that up.
Yeah.
I mean, his response was, you know, you're not going to get anything if the Confederacy wins. But that was, he seems to be genuinely taken aback by, you know, it really makes him think too.
Right. Yeah. I think Tripp said something like, you know, we can win, but we still won't be winners or whatever, you know, blacks still won't be winners.
Yeah, he says you get to go home to your big house and, you know, you get to have your life. What about us? What do? We won't have anything except our freedom. And you get to start over. It kind of brings me to this next point. Why do you think the filmmaker and the screenwriter as well chose to present this story from the perspective of the white colonel rather than the troops that he was commanding?
I think for a couple reasons, really. One, you know, if you're looking to make it very historical, you have to start with the information available to you. And because of the position Shaw was in and his parents' position, his letters were immortalized and saved at Harvard. Unfortunately, even the members like Thomas, for example, that were in that particular regiment, if they had letters that they were writing back, for those of them that could, and many of them weren't able to read or write, you know, if Thomas had written letters back to someone, who would have preserved those for him? Where would we be finding that information? So I think it's taken from the most reliable source available. It doesn't mean that those other sources don't exist, but I think they'd be much harder to find. And I think it does give you a little bit more of a perspective of, you know, the overwhelming social culture from the North, which I think is where they were trying to tell that story from too. because of course the South has their own motives and own issues that may or may not be related to slavery, but certainly got lumped into that during the war. And, you know, some of the valid reasons that some people may have fought for that weren't, you know, protecting the rights of landowners to have slaves, but certainly some of the economic and other issues that they were seeing as being taken advantage of by the North. We don't see that voice told very often. I think it would be interesting. I would love to see if, you know, if there's a collection of letters from any or any correspondence from the 54th, from the actual service members rather than the leadership. I think that would make a fascinating read, and that would be a story I would really like to hear. I just don't know.
Actually, there's a couple of regimental histories that have come out since, and I believe it's Caroline Janney, a scholar out of University of Virginia. She's done a couple of things. Somebody has done a couple of things on the USCT troops overall, the United States Colored Troops. And so there's actually been, and some of it is spurred by this movie, which really helped open up in the popular minds this aspect of the war. But there's been a couple of books since this movie's come out that that explore that, and there's still more to be done. There's still a lot more to be done for sure.
And could I get that author's name again? I'm going to look those up.
Caroline Janney.
If you,
I'll put it in the chat.
Okay,
Oh,
thank you.
I appreciate
if you
it.
actually look at the DVD or the Blu-rays of this movie, they actually have a whole segment all about the voices of the 54th, and it's all the comes from just the regular troops. And what they actually do is they bring in African-American actors to read them, and it really lends a lot of power to it to hear these voices. I think a big thing with this movie too is one of the books that is based off of One Gallon Rush reads very much less as a history of the 54th and more of a history of Robert Shaw's life. And then again, this is, for being such a pivotal war in America's history, the Civil War, I really don't think has been put to film as many times as you compare to something like World War II. And even then, most of the times that it's been put to film, it hasn't been done in the best way. And, you know, this is also the height of when the Civil War blew up in popularity. Ken Burns' Civil War comes out right after, and we're still getting a very rose-colored picture of it.
I think even the title of the film kind of, you know, that it's called Glory, when I'm sure it didn't feel glorious to the men who were living it, kind of gives you a sense of, maybe at the end, maybe there's some purposes and you're certainly looking for that, but on a day-to-day basis, I don't know that glory would be the most desired or most frequently used adjective.
Yeah, I agree. I thought that too. I thought, why did they call it glory? I was actually trying to kind of figure out why they would have called it that. It didn't seem kind of appropriate to the, I mean, they lived on in glory, I guess, you know, as for their legacy, but I don't know. It struck me as kind of strange.
I found it interesting that seeing things from the black troops perspective, that I read that apparently there's some really interesting stories, that like real stories, how, you know, Gould Shaw is obviously based on the real person, but the rest of the characters weren't really based on anyone in particular. But there were some, apparently the first African-American Medal of Honor winner was part of the 54th. And
Sergeant William Carney.
yeah, I believe 2 of Frederick Douglass's sons served in the unit, which gets back to the whole, that was really bizarre how they used Frederick Douglass in this movie. He doesn't get to like say anything, or he just like makes a random appearance. But yeah, no, I thought that was kind of strange.
Yeah, and you're right, Mike. The black soldiers were not indicative of the volunteers for that regiment. 75% of the enlistees in that regiment came from free states. They had, you know, what was considered high educational backgrounds for the most part. And I think it was just for entertainment purposes that they had to kind of put this ensemble of stereotypes together. But it also helps move the movie along, because you do see these characters grow. You know, you have the educated Searles, you have the escaped slave Trip, You have the more veteran, wiser old man in Morgan Freeman's character, and so, you know, as you're trying to put the historical accuracy into this movie, you also still have to remember, you know, that this is Hollywood, and you do have to tell an entertaining and gripping story, and so you do have to take some kind of liberties with, you know, character development and who they are. And then you're right about Frederick Douglass's son. I think there were two of them that had volunteered. One of them became Sergeant Major of the regiment. So I guess that kind of would have been Morgan Freeman's role, although clearly he wasn't Frederick Douglass's son in the movie. And I always thought, kind of, just, you know, a side note, how Morgan Freeman was a ditch digger or a grave digger in Antietam, and then a few months later, he's all the way up in Boston signing up for this regiment. I thought that was kind of unique. How did he get up there so quickly? You know, he wouldn't have had the same kind of you know, access to whatever Colonel Shaw would have had, or Captain Shaw at the time. I just thought it was unique how all of a sudden here's Morgan Freeman in Boston when he was just down in Pennsylvania not too much shorter before that. And then to kind of speak to, you know, what everybody else has been talking about here, you know, telling this story through the eyes of a white colonel, and actually it's kind of more through the eyes of two white officers. And then you have this other group of men who are the four black soldiers. And then you kind of got right in the middle, you know, the connection between the two sides is you have Thomas Searles, who has to become, you know, he has to become the soldier. He wasn't a very good soldier in the beginning. It was said so by a couple different people in his unit, higher and lower ranks. But he does become, you know, a worthy soldier. He does live up to his expectations and everybody else's as well. And so I just thought it was kind of neat that you do have this one person, although he's not my favorite character in the movie, but you do have this one person that kind of bridges both sides together. And then when they go into training, I just want to, and this is from a military standpoint, these are the kind of things that I like to watch when I'm watching military movies. You have the two different attitudes that are represented by Shaw and by Forbes. Anybody want to speak to those two different attitudes and maybe what they were, what you saw from both of those officers?
Well, I would, being from the Navy, it was the CO and the XO kind of attitude where good cop, bad cop. It's, you know, the CO is always the bad cop, and the XO tries to be the good cop, or vice versa. It's actually, in the Navy, it was always backwards, you know. So XO was the bad guy that would, you know, crush you in any way that he could, and the CO was kind of the good guy that everybody looked up to, that's leading the ship and stuff like that. So I think that's what I picked up on, was the good cop, bad cop type thing.
Yeah, except I don't think it was structured between the two on purpose. They clearly went into this with two different motivations. And especially with Forbes, somebody had mentioned earlier how, you know, nobody thought this unit was really going to fight. Nobody thought that this unit was really going to do anything except learn how to march and do, you know, grunt work. And that's kind of the attitude that Forbes had. And you see a couple different scenes between Forbes and Shaw where, you know, he's kind of trying to remind Shaw, you know, that's what's going to become of these guys, is they're never going to see combat. They're never going to amount to anything. This is all just for show. And Shaw doesn't believe that at all. And Shaw is training them and getting them ready for the rigors and horrors of war. He's training them to become warriors and soldiers because he knows, well, he doesn't know that they're going to fight, but he certainly hopes they will, and he wants them to be as prepared as possible.
I think even if they didn't fight, he was hoping that they would at least gain some respect and come across as capable and well-trained, if not only for the men, for himself as their commanding officer. I think, like, you notice that difference in the disparity between Shaw and Forbes, but was it Mulcahy?
Sergeant Major Mulcahy, yeah.
Yeah, he was one of the first ones that really showed that he thought they had true potential, and he thought they deserved to be trained as hard as possible for their own survival and benefit. And even kind of brought that to Shaw at one point, that I think that was probably also rather unusual for the time.
Now that you said that, I actually took it as a different line. I thought Mulcahy was literally job focused. He came in there to do the job that he does and do it exactly the way that he does it. And I don't care if you're purple, black, green, I don't care what color you are. This is my job, and that's what I'm going to do. So I thought that's how I took it.
I would kind of go with both of those routes. Certainly, he was the sergeant major brought in to trainee soldiers, and you're right, Lee. When you're the sergeant major, when you're the drill sergeant, it doesn't matter if you're purple or green or black or white or short or tall, what have you. Your job is to train soldiers, get them ready. But at the same time, I think that maybe he was also hoping that they would get to realize what their training, the end goal of their training. They would get to go see battle, and they would be prepared for it. I just had a thought and I lost it. Shoot.
I like the scene where they, I think it's, for my mind, it really shows the difference between how Forbes and Gould Shaw are approaching the whole training of the unit, where they learn, Shaw, they're all standing around and they learn that Sharts is apparently a crack shot from back home, just growing up hunting, shooting squirrels and stuff, and he's going about it all leisurely. And then Shaw comes along and, gives him a little more realistic view of what it would be like to be loading, and he starts firing his pistol by his head, and, Sharts obviously gets very nervous and very, it's much more realistic then. You realize it's not just a leisurely shooting contest, a game.
That and someone standing with a pistol behind my head, I kind of think they're maybe a little crazy. So, I would be uncomfortable, not just because of the noise, but I don't know what the motives of this guy are, because that was still so early. They didn't really have a trust for him. I think it took some time, and even Tripp's kind of protest by not accepting pay until Shaw kind of showed some solidarity with that. He didn't really have the respect of his troops yet. I think that was hard for him to earn, because they didn't necessarily see him as a ally. They saw him as, another white man in power that isn't treating me very well at all, which could have been just from military experience, a leader to troops, but they wouldn't have had that experience necessarily yet.
I thought too that Mulcahy probably had a chip on his shoulder. They said something about him being Irish, and today we think of Boston and Irish as being the same thing, but those were Irish immigrants who were not the high society like Gould Shaw. So I think he had a lot to prove, and it's almost like, if I had to go through hell to be trained myself, that's what I'm going to put you guys through, because it'll toughen you up. I know how it affected me. I know how it'll help you.
Yeah, and I remember what I was going to say. It was a very good point that was brought up earlier. Not only was Sergeant Major Mulcahy there to train the troops, but he was also there to train Shaw as well. He was there to show him how to become a leader, how to become a good commander. And the one scene, Mike, you were talking about the scene where Sharts is showing his marksmanship. But there was the other scene where Thomas Searles was getting reamed out by the sergeant major, and he used some denigrating language. And Shaw calls him over, and he's like, is that really necessary? And Sergeant Major Mulcahy tells him, I understand that this guy was a friend of yours. Let him grow up a little bit more.
Yeah, that was a great
and I think that really kind of turned Shaw's thinking at that time, that maybe I need to grow up a little bit more too. And I think that's where you start seeing some of the hardness come through in Shaw. and where he starts to really focus on making sure that these troops are going to get ready for battle.
Right.
Sorry,
I believe, sorry, I was just gonna say, I believe it's the scene here where they're going through bayonet drill, if I'm not mistaken.
I'm not sure if it's that one or if there's another one where he was just getting after Searles for, just not being as hard as he thinks he should be.
Oh yeah, you're right. No, you're right. I'm mistaken.
But you're right. This scene with the bayonet, I found that kind of interesting as well, because that's when he stabbed me with your bayonet, and he swats him away, and don't try to tickle me and all that. At the end of the movie, if you notice, when Searles is going over the ramparts at Fort Wagner, he has somebody come at him, and he uses that exact same bayonet technique at the end of the movie with success that he couldn't perform earlier against Sergeant Major. And so that's just one of the little pieces of character development that I really like throughout the film. You just really see these guys grow. Yeah. And then somebody just talked a second ago. There's just a few more points I want to hit. We are starting to run out of time a little bit. I did have the question here, describe some of the actions that made Shaw a good leader. And certainly, I think one of the things that everybody would say across the board was his getting on tune with the other soldiers when it came to the pay status.
Yeah, that was a turning point, I think.
Originally, or not originally, historically, the historical accurate portion of that is that it was actually Shaw's idea to not take pay. It was not the regiment's idea. There was some fuss, but that came after Shaw had already told them what was going to happen, and Shaw had already made up his mind prior to telling the regiment that they were not going to receive equal pay. He'd already made up his mind that he wasn't going to take the pay either. And so while that's kind of accurately portrayed in the movie, it's kind of not. It really does lend itself to showing how Shaw is becoming more endeared to his troops. But I think maybe had they sacrificed a little bit of that entertainment value and showed the historically accurate part of that, I think it might have made Shaw's character maybe a little more solid, especially in those early parts. And then, of course, while they're in training, there's a lot of things going on. But what do you think the most important thing that happens to them that makes them come together as a unit instead of a bunch of individuals?
There were a couple of things. Seeing themselves set apart from Montgomery's troops, just by their own standards, and recognizing that in themselves as, that is not the kind of soldiers we are. That's not the kind of people we are. I think that was probably pretty galvanizing. When Morgan Freeman kind of stands up to the other troops that are passing by the 54th, and that kind of, I guess that interaction in general just makes them see themselves more as soldiers rather than Black soldiers or colored soldiers, the color regiment. So that was rather powerful, I think. And I don't know how accurate it is either when they were having that prayer circle, song circle the night before. But that kind of something, and participation and like self-disclosure amongst the group certainly would have been really galvanizing. And Tripp's declaration of his fellow privates and fellow soldiers, referring to them as family, I think probably would have been galvanizing, even if it wasn't done exactly that way.
Yeah, no, Denzel Washington did a fantastic job in that movie. His whole part, you could see him grow. And you're right. He at that point he does call them family. When they first all get together, he doesn't give a hoot for any of them, especially Snowflake.
Yeah.
I would argue that the thing that really brought them all together, and this was actually historically, looking at the historical side of it, this was very important for them as well. It is documented. Was when they got their uniforms. They got the blue uniform. They were able to put that on. That really showed them that they're being accepted, more or less. When you get the uniform that everybody else has, especially the white people, you get that uniform to put on, you're a part of this as well. And then they got the weapons. And I thought that was pretty significant too, especially during this time. You're going to entrust 1,100 black guys with weapons, particularly with the mindset that they had then. That was putting a lot of faith into what it is that they were trying to do. And so I thought that was a really bonding moment for them.
That was interesting, that scene though, where was it Shaw that was kind of watching after those had been distributed, and certainly there was a little bit of play acting with the soldiers because they finally have weapons, you know, kind of the ambiguity that was on his face, and that certainly you're left to imagine what you think is going through his mind, but it did seem like he was a little concerned by what he was seeing, but he either swallowed that and dealt with it, or he had to.
I see what you're saying there. I always kind of looked at that as, you know, he has been through the horrors of war, and it's not playtime. These guys don't know that yet. They haven't been through that, and I mean, I'm not saying that you know, you're wrong and I'm right. You do bring up a very good point, and I could definitely see that now that you say it like that. That's not the way I took it, but I'll have to go back and watch that again. And see if there's any nuance there that I can, you know, kind of pick up from his character, and just and maybe look at it from that aspect instead.
Well,
My initial impression. Sorry, go ahead, Kathy.
Oh, thank you. I was just going to say that scene with Montgomery, you know, if anybody had the right to be sort of vengeful and carry out this, carry out this attack on this little community, you would think it would be the black soldiers who'd have this anger, you know, and maybe want to do this sort of activity. But in fact, it was this white colonel who was, you know, not going by the books and felt it was just fine to destroy these homes and so on. So who could really be trusted with the gun, I guess I'm asking.
Yeah.
No, and that's a very good point as well, Kathy. You're right. You know, by this time they had become disciplined. They hadn't fought yet, but they had come together as a unit. And you're right, they were kind of taken aback by what Colonel Montgomery was having his troops do. You could clearly see on their faces that they don't think it's right. And then given the choice of, you know, court-martial and turn your troops over to me, or do as I tell you to do, Matthew Broderick, you know, he does, I guess, well, I don't want to say what any of us would do, but I think he made the right choice. You know, you're forced to choose between two evils, the lesser of two evils, I suppose.
And I'd like to think he made that choice not because of the court-martial fear, but because he really wanted the best for his men. I think that was one of the first times you see that. Like even when he volunteers the regiment for, you know, fighting at Fort Wagner and leading that, he doesn't do that for his own glory. He's, at least I don't see it that way. I see that he's doing that because his men, he knows his men want to do that. And I think his discussion with Tripp really played into that. That he's like, you know, what are these men going to get out of being in this regiment? You know, are they going to be able to be heroic and be seen as heroic and have that glory and that kind of reputation and respect that comes from that? Or are they going to go through this whole war and then end up on the street, or, you know, really not able to have much of a life? And he very well knew, particularly leading that he was very likely to die. But still made that choice, doing what he believed at least was best for his men. That's a good sign of a good leader, I think.
No, I would definitely agree. He wasn't concerned with the court-martial at all. He just didn't want to see his men turned over to Montgomery, and you know, knowing what he would do with them. Absolutely not. And it kind of reminded me of Band of Brothers too, when Lieutenant Winters is threatened with court-martial. He's like, you know what? Give me the paper. I'm going to sign it because this is wrong, and I'm not going to have my soldiers turned over to you. It's kind of the same thing there. I just always correlate that. just a couple more points. We're down to like 5 minutes left. There's a couple things that they don't mention about Shaw as they're going through the movie. First of all, he was married this whole time, which kind of brings me to respect him a little bit more, because not only when you watch the movie, he's making these choices, these decisions for his troops, and that's hard enough for just a regular person to do. But to know that you have a family back home and you're still making decisions that is not taking them into account, you're still focused on your troops. I just thought that was even more commendable. There was a lot of scenes filmed where he, makes reference to his wife. He writes letters to his wife just like he does to his mother. But those scenes were all cut. This movie runs 2 hours and 2 minutes as it is. And I think that would have added another half hour or so. So that really would have started to put it very long, especially for a movie in 1989. I think that there are some versions of the movie that you can get where these scenes are included. Reagan, did you notice any of those in the DVD features that you were talking about earlier?
They don't have them as the deleted scenes fully, but they do have some of the audio tracks, and in the audio commentary, they bring them up.
Excellent. I'll have to go back and take a look at those too. I think I have the extra CD that has, for the DVD, that has all the information on it. And going into the last of my notes, the question I always like to ask at the end, and I enjoy everybody's responses, and there is there's no right or wrong answers to any of these, but this is my favorite question to ask. Who was your favorite character in the movie and why?
I liked Rawlings because Morgan Freeman, for one thing, but he seemed to be the kind of the bridge between the the troops and the officers. Form the bridge.
Anybody else want to jump in on their favorite character?
I like Shards. Shards was my favorite. I don't know. I liked his, he just has this childlike innocence, and in the beginning, he's when he meets serials, or he's so excited to learn to read, and he doesn't conform to the stereotype of being, apparently, he is a very good shot. He's very skilled with his weapon, unlike you'd expect him to be from what you learn about his character or whatever. You expect him to not be a very good, potentially good soldier. He's my favorite.
I definitely agree with that. Sharts has always been my favorite, and I think the scene at the end where after Thomas gets bayoneted in the back and Sharts goes and covers him and carries him out, I mean, that for me, that was really one of my favorite parts. It just shows how he never really lost, how he always had that sort of love for the regiment and his good nature even during this time of war.
Yeah, if you compare yourself, I think often you see characters and you like the ones that you hope resemble you a little bit. And I think there's a hope that maybe I'm more like Sharts than I am like a lot of the other characters on there. Because yeah, you're right. There's a good nature and altruism there that doesn't exist in most of the other characters you see. And him not being based on a real character, maybe that's why he can be completely altruistic. Most of us aren't quite that good, but I don't know, he liked to root for the good guy.
And I'm just going to go with Mulcahy because it reminded me of Full Metal Jacket, Ermi. And I just love that character, and I just like somebody who just has a job to do and does it. Unfortunately, just do it.
Well, and like she just said as well, when you try to look at characters that kind of resemble who you are, and I would have to say Mulcahy as well. I was a sergeant in the Army, and I loved my troops to death, but I treated them pretty much like that. Hard, no nonsense. You're not going to get away with anything. You're probably going to dislike me, but at the end of the day, it's all going to be for your benefit. So yeah, I have to admit, Sergeant Major Mulcahy was my favorite character as well. We are coming right up on 8 o'clock. I want to thank everybody for participating. This was a fantastic discussion. I didn't even get through half my notes this time. Last time I went through all my notes and had to start looking up stuff. So I really appreciate the discussion this time. And like I said, the movies that we're going to start showing are going to start making you think a little bit more. They're going to start to play on your emotions and your thought processes. The next month for September, we're going to watch Saving Private Ryan. I'm going to have those discussion questions coming out on Monday. Lee? You okay there?
Yeah.
So that's going to be the movies for September. October, I'm going to go a little bit more with the bizarre theme, since it is right at Halloween time, and we're going to look at Apocalypse Now. And I won't have those discussion questions done for a couple weeks yet, but by Monday I should have discussion questions out for anybody who starts registering for next month's movie night, like I said, which will be Saving Private Ryan. I do believe that is already posted on our website, so you can go ahead and register for that event. We look forward to having everybody back. And once again, I'd like to thank the Wisconsin Veterans Museum Foundation for sponsoring these discussions that we have and all of our events that we're doing virtually now. And then, of course, everybody out there. You guys were fantastic tonight. And I thoroughly enjoyed everybody's opinions. And I cannot wait to have you all back and talk about more movies next month.